This is Matt Singer. I'm the Arts and Culture Editor at Willamette Week, and my guest today is Steve Dean, longtime Oregon journalist, longtime columnist for the Oregonian. He's written for Willamette Week as well, and he is also the author of this recently released book. It is a graphic novel translation of the Mueller Report. And Steve, maybe you could just kind of start by telling me why this subject and why this treatment.
Shannon first came to me, Shannon Wheeler, the cartoonist, first came to me with the idea to do this last July. And, you know, about a month or two after Mueller had, actually 3 months after Mueller had come out with his report. And at the time, I was in a panic thinking we had to produce something very quickly. As it turned out, I think what we realized as the months went by, that the Mueller report has become more and more significant and more sort of foundational in terms of the case against Trump. And the graphic novel format lent itself in a number of ways to helping people understand what Mueller was trying to do. And let me just give you two examples. I mean, Mueller's report is incredibly dense. It's 486 pages. We had 400 panels. So we had to dramatically simplify his conclusions, which I thought was essential. And secondly, I think comics lends itself to helping explain the medium helps to explain what Mueller was trying to do and allows us, the conventions of the medium allow us to have some fun with a very, very serious subject. I mean, if you look at our book, for example, we have, you know, sort of the Dick Tracy rogue cards throughout the book. We have, you know, there's time for sight gags and sort of pushing that idea to the limit. I think what we're hoping is that when middle school and high school students study this thing, they'll use our graphic novel rather than that 486 report, because it's sort of like, I guess the analogy would be Classics Illustrated. Those ways that when you and I were growing up, we might read Moby Dick or Hamlet or whatever. I think we're trying to sort of simplify and help you understand the basics of what Mueller was trying to do.
Can you tell me a little bit about the graphical representation of Trump in this book? Because he's not portrayed quite in like the grotesque way that you would normally see like political cartoonists kind of depict him. Like he almost looks like something out of Family Circus.
And I think, you know, we tried to pull back a little bit on the sort of a relentless humiliation of Trump that many cartoonists enjoy. And I think we try to play it a little straighter than that. Yeah, Trump comes off as a child often in the book. I think he also comes across somewhat sympathetically on occasion as a guy who never felt he got credit for pulling off an unbelievable political coup. I mean, winning the 16 election is the greatest scam of Trump's life. He didn't expect to pull it off. And when he didn't get credit for it, he overreacted in a number of ways. So I think there are times when we're actually trying to help readers understand why Trump went off the deep end, at least when it came to obstruction. It was because he felt like justice was not done in getting credit for his election.
So to be frank, the Mueller report feels like it happened, you know, a century ago. For many reasons. And, you know, one of those is that, you know, it seems like Trump just kind of moves from scandal to scandal on a monthly, if not weekly basis. Do you think when the smoke kind of clears on his presidency that, you know, his dealings with Russia and, you know, what's been called Russiagate, will that sort of be like the defining aspect of his presidency? At least as far as, you know, to this point, do you feel like it will define him years from now?
I would probably argue the articles of impeachment are going to define him a little bit more. His, you know, relentless racism and misogyny may define him a little bit more. The relevancy, though, of the Mueller report, I would argue, and somewhat self-servingly, of course, is that every time I turn around, there's something that's happening that brings the Mueller report back into the public sort of arena. I mean, the DOJ's ridiculous decision to drop charges against Michael Flynn, the debut of the Comey rule on Showtime, the 1,000-page Senate report by the Republicans, which actually hammers home much harder the link between Paul Manafort and the Ukrainian oligarchs. In fact, just last night, who knows when this is going to run, but just last night I'm hearing the vice president lie about what the Mueller report said. He said, there's no conspiracy, no collusion, no obstruction. Collusion is never even alleged in the Mueller report. And there are all sorts of examples of obstruction that Mueller makes clear. And I think, yes, you need to keep reminding folks of what Mueller established, inarguably, in a political environment where we're arguing about what facts are, for God's sake.
So, even though you're clearly not a fan of Trump, you do mention that you've made room for some sympathy for him, at least in your depiction of him in the Mueller Report book. But in the last week since he's gotten COVID, there has been this sort of outpouring there's been a lot of glee from people who, from the anti-Trump contingent, about the fact opponents of Trump about celebrating the fact that he has COVID-19. What's your take on that? I mean, is it wrong for some of us to take some level of joy in his health problems?
God, no. And nor should we be making too much, I suppose, of the irony that at a pro-life celebration of the death of a Supreme Court justice, somehow the angel of death appears and half the people in the room get COVID. I mean, or half the people in the Rose Garden. I guess as I watch this, he's the ultimate narcissist, as you know. I think he's terrified. There was that damning Herman Cain timeline where Cain thinks he's totally cured of acquiring COVID at one of Trump rallies. He's fine. He's insisting 4 weeks later. He's dead 3 days after that. I don't think Trump thinks he's out from underneath the cloud of this. I think and it's hard watching him to, once again, see his absolutely determination to focus on himself as opposed to all the other victims of COVID, and his absolute inability to understand this nation's and our culture's horror at what's happened to us because of this disease, and the total lack of empathy we've gotten from the president as a result of it, because it's just not convenient for him politically.